when you're done calling people fart faces and buttholes, maybe you can listen up for our next guest, because she's going to bring civility back into the fold. And it's about time, because we live in times of such uncivil discourse that we need to find a way to find common ground and to offer a little bit of grace to people we disagree with. She has written a phenomenal book. I absolutely love it, The Soul of Civility. So please give a warm welcome for a woman who lives in my birth state of Indiana, Alexandra Hudson.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Such a pleasure to be with you here today. This is my first Freedom Fest, and I'm having a great time. I want to start by thanking Matt Day and the whole Freedom Fest team for making me feel so welcome, and Matt's been kind of my Sherpa so far. And so thank you to Freedom Fest, thank you to Casey Given. I don't know if you're here, but thank you to Young Voices for making it possible for me to be here. Raise your hand if any Young Voices alum in the crowd. If anyone's interested in refining their writing or speaking skills for media and television, Young Voices has an incubator program for young writers and journalists to elevate classical liberal voices, so check them out as well. And I want to thank Kennedy. Medicine really is, humor is really medicine for the soul, as the book of Proverbs says, and she's just a joy to be around. So Kennedy, thank you for that warm introduction. And I want to start with a story that has to do with my book that I'm here to talk about today, but also has to do with Kennedy. I met Kennedy publication week of my book. So Young Voices hosted a really lovely media dinner for me in New York City the night before my book came out. My book is called The Soul of Civility, Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. And I adored Kennedy and her lovely significant other, Fred, right away. And we hit it off because we both have roots in Indiana now. And she was kind enough to invite me on her podcast, which was on publication day the very next day. And publication day came, and I was so excited. This is a product of a lifetime of thought and a decade of work, my book, which is about how to flourish across deep difference. And I had seen these videos of people going into bookstores and signing their books on publication day, and I wanted to do that. So I got up publication day. I went to Barnes & Noble's in New York City, and I expected to see my book piled high or in the front window, and it was really anticlimactic when I didn't see it anywhere. I walk in, and I look around. It's nowhere to be found. So I go to a clerk at Barnes & Noble, and I said, excuse me, do you know where this title is, The Soul of Civility? And they said, they have to look it up, and they say, oh, it looks like we have 2 copies in stock, and it looks like they're in the basement. And so I go down to the basement, and I search around, and I dig behind 2 other piles of books and find my 2 copies of the book that they had in stock, and I take it to the clerk, and I say, I'm the author of my book. This is my publication day. I'd love to sign these books. And she goes, okay. So she gives me a pen, and she gives me these little signed by the author stickers to put on the book. And I go to the front of the store, and I sign the book, and I put my sticker on, and it felt a little bit anticlimactic, but I did it. And I was about to leave, take a deep breath, and I walk out the door to leave, and then a security guard stops me. He says, excuse me, ma'am, I saw you writing those books. Do you plan on paying for them? I was mortified. I was absolutely humiliated. A manager comes up to me after and says, "Oh, these are her books. She's the author. Let her go. It's fine." And I went right from there in Barnes and Noble's, in tears, to Kennedy for our podcast interview, and I was an utter mess. And she just picked me up, put me back together. And we had a lovely, 20-minute conversation on her podcast. So go back in the archives of Kennedy's wonderful podcast and enjoy that conversation. So really grateful for Kennedy's friendship, and she was such a warm presence in New York City throughout that week. She hosted us for dinner, my husband and I, and we had cocktails, we had shepherd's pie, and played fishbowl. All these traits of true America, Midwestern Americana. So which is relevant as I'll mention in a second. So really grateful to her and her friendship for embodying true civility and true hospitality in that way. So my book is about, again, the most important question of our day: how do we flourish across deep difference? And this is the central question to democracy, to the classical liberal project. I came to my interest in this topic of civility honestly. My mother is called, and I'm not joking, Judy the Manners Lady. And she's kind of this mix between Julia Andrews in both The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins. Like my home was everything was a song, everything was joy-filled, everything was a game. And she was also mindful that my brothers and I comply with certain social expectations, and I am, this won't surprise people in this room, but I am constitutionally allergic to authority. I hate rules. I hate being told what to do. I almost get arrested every time I go through TSA because I just hate arbitrary expressions of power and authority. And so I remember growing up, my mother would ask us to set the table just so and to shake hands or cut our food just so. And I wanted to know why. Why do we do things the way that we do them? And I never really got satisfactory answers to these questions from her, but I did follow them generally because she promised they would lead to success in work and school and life. And she was right. Until I found myself in federal government. I worked in Washington, D.C. from 2017 to 2018, and I could not have been more disillusioned or discouraged by my experience there. When I was in government, I saw these two extremes. On one hand, I saw people who were bellicose, hostile, belligerent. They were willing to steamroll and silence anyone in order to get what they wanted and obtain their objectives. On the other hand, I saw people who were polished and poised and polite. At first, I thought these were my people. But it turns out these were people who would smile and flatter me and others one moment, only to stab us in the back the next. And at first, I thought these were polar opposites, these two extremes, the extreme hostility and the extreme politeness. But I actually realized they're very similar. They're actually two sides of the same coin. Both modes insufficiently appreciate the gift of being human. Human dignity and personhood. They see other human beings as means to their selfish ends, as opposed to human beings who are worthy of respect in and of themselves, just by virtue of our shared moral status as members of the human community. And this clarified for me that there was an essential distinction between civility and politeness, that just going through the form and motions of being respectful and nice wasn't actually enough. I realized that politeness is etiquette, it's manners, it's technique, it's external stuff, whereas civility is internal. It's a disposition of the heart. It's a way of seeing others as our moral equals, worthy of a bare minimum of respect just by virtue of our shared moral status as members of the human community. And that crucially, sometimes actually respecting someone and actually respecting ourselves requires being impolite. It requires telling a hard truth, engaging in robust debate, not polishing over difference, not sweeping difference under the rug as politeness demands, but acting with civility, which is in fact a duty of citizenship, which is etymologically linked with our word civility, and engaging in debate, which is the lifeblood, especially of a democracy. And I came to realize that we need less politeness in our world today, less of the form of virtue and goodness and tolerance and respect, and more of the substance of it, more civility, which actually respects people enough to risk hurting their feelings or even offending them. It's easy to look around us in our moment and feel like we live in what must be the most uncivil moment. But in fact, this question of civility is a timeless one. As long as we've been around, we've been trying to do this thing called life together with others. And as long as we've been around, it has been hard. This is because we are defined by two competing forces, love of others and love of self. We become fully human in relationship with others, and yet morally and biologically, we're driven to meet our own needs before others, which can at times undermine the human social project. And thankfully, though this problem is timeless, so is the solution. And the solution is civility. Did you know, for example, that the oldest book in the world is a civility book? It's given to us from ancient Egypt, 2350 BC. And these maxims from a gentleman named Ptahhotep are just as relevant today as they were when they were written 4 millennia ago. They're things like, don't slander, don't abuse a power differential, don't be good to your friends just when you need something, be good to them all the time. So timeless problem, timeless solution. And we also insufficiently appreciate the way that civility supports our free and flourishing society and our democracy. Raise your hand in this room if anyone has heard of Mayor Michael Bloomberg's politeness campaign from when he was mayor of New York City. Anyone? A few people here? Well, this is a great story that illustrates why our everyday decisions to voluntarily respect and consider the needs and well-being of our fellow citizens and fellow human beings does support our free and flourishing society. And when we don't, leaders past and present will be tempted to do that for us. So when Michael Bloomberg was mayor of New York City, he and his team of bureaucrats decided that incivility had reached a fever pitch, and something had to be done about it. So overnight, they roll out a series of legislative proposals, and all of a sudden, it became a crime to be uncivil. So if you were on the subway and you inconsiderately put your feet up on the subway seat next to you, fined $50. If you were at a Broadway musical or at a movie theater and took a phone call or were inconsiderately texting, fined $50. If you were a parent or a grandparent at your kid's softball game and you found yourself being a little bit too enthusiastic or rambunctious, you could be fined $50. You can imagine New Yorkers did not quite like being civilized by their local government. And so this did not last long. And it was also because we don't live in a police state, it was impossible to enforce. We don't have cameras and police officers on every corner, and we don't want that. We don't want people micromanaging our every interaction. And I love this story for the way that it illustrates that. Edward Shills called this the sociologist Edward Shills called this the antinomies of liberalism. That within a free society, we have the freedom to undermine our freedom. The founding fathers of America, in fact, they didn't think all freedom was equal. They differentiated between liberty, which was the virtuous, the pro-human, the positive uses of our freedom, and vice, and license, which was the vicious use of our freedom as well. So within a free society, we have the freedom to undermine our freedom. And the more that we voluntarily, the less that we voluntarily consider the needs and well-beings of our fellow citizens, the more often authoritarians past and present will be tempted to modulate our conduct for us. So in many ways, our democracy does depend on civility. We also insufficiently appreciate the power we each have to be a part of the solution to our deeply divided and lonely and polarized world. I learned this firsthand when I moved from Washington, D.C. to Indiana. I remember the day very clearly. I came home from work. I said to my husband, I am done with D.C., I'm done with the swamp, I'm done with politics. Let's move to Indiana. And my husband said, okay, sounds good. We'll move to Indiana, where he's from originally. No take-backs, he told me. And a few months later, we were out there. And I remember one of my first friends in Indiana, her name was Joanna Taft. She came up to me and said, hi, I'm Joanna. Would you like to porch with us sometime? And I never heard the word porch used as a verb before, but I was curious and we didn't know many people, so we went to her home that afternoon. And I realized that Joanna was staging a quiet, citizen-led, subversive revolution against our atomized, alienated, partisan status quo. She had curated people across race, politics, social class, geography, not to have a structured conversation across difference, but just to inhabit a shared space together outside of these silos and to remind us of what we had in common as citizens and members of the human community. And as I was writing my book, I met people across the country who are doing the same thing. They are saying, I can't control what's happening in Washington. I don't know who's going to become president, but I can control myself. And I'm going to make my community better and more beautiful and stronger from right where I am. And each of us can too, in our everyday, in our ways great and small. We insufficiently appreciate the way that our democracy is woven together, and how the fabric of our civilization is woven and held together by our everyday decisions to respect the dignity, personhood of our fellow citizens. And the more of us that choose to reclaim the soul of civility, that maybe, just maybe, we might be able to change the trajectory of our country and maybe even the world. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Freedom Fest, and thrilled to be with you here today. Thank you.